Previously on JSpeaks.
When we think about how do we manage burnout, we do think about the individual, how they're responding, but also how is the environment that they're in responding. People tend to get burned out in work environments where they don't have a lot of control, they have a high amount of responsibility, where they don't feel respected or honored for the work that they're doing, don't feel seen in what they're doing, where they feel like a number. Those kinds of work environments can more likely lead to folks feeling burned out.
Check out today. The facts and fictions about your mental health.
Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, welcome. And if you're subscribed to JSpeaks, thank you so much and welcome back. I am thrilled for today's conversation topic. As you know, it is my mission and it's my passion to bring to you all conversation topics that are positive, motivational, informational, and educational. Today I'm delighted to be sitting here with Dr. Tom Murray, PhD, sex therapist, clinical supervisor, educator, and author of his new book, Making Nice with Naughty. Please sit back and relax, and hopefully after today's episode, you will know if marriage is right for you. It's truly a pleasure to be sitting with you right now, Dr. Murray. Thank you so much for your willingness to talk with me.
I'm so delighted to be here.
Thank you. Before we get started, do you mind telling me a little bit about yourself and how you became a PhD, sex therapist, clinical supervisor, educator, author?
Yeah, for sure. I went to graduate school at the University of Florida, and I graduated in 2005 with a PhD in couple and family therapy, and have been working mostly in the area of education, either as the director of a university counseling center, or in 2017 I opened the private practice here in Greensboro, North Carolina, Path to Wellness, where it's a niche-based practice primarily focused on sex therapy and couples therapy.
Nice, nice. So what did anybody motivate you to get into this field, or I don't know, maybe a parent or anybody?
Yeah, well, I think I was an RA in college,
Yes.
and as often as the RA, you have these really great conversations with people. Mm-hmm. And I first thought I was going to be a high school social studies teacher. That was what my undergrad was in addition to psychology. And at some point in my education, I was like, do I want to be a teacher for 30 years, or would I want to be a therapist for 30 years? And so that really led me to go into pursuing a couple and family therapy. But in undergrad, I said to my biology professor, I was talking to him about how I often find myself having conversations with people about their sex lives. And he goes, that's a gift. You really should do something about it. And so the plan was to eventually get my certification as a sex therapist. And I think that was really a motivator, was having that professor in undergrad encouraging me to go into that profession.
Nice. Just curious, out of curiosity, do you still keep in contact with the professor? Does he know that you have?
No.
No.
No, I wish I did. I wouldn't even remember the person's name. That's how pathetic and sad it is.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm sure he'll be very happy that you took his advice.
Well, thank you.
Now, getting into my first question, what do you believe is the top 3 reasons why people do not attend therapy or sex therapy?
Well, particularly if we're going to talk about sex therapy, I think one of them is that people are just nervous. Sex is one of those topics that makes people really feel vulnerable to talk about. Even with their own partner, a lot of people avoid talking about important aspects of their sexuality. Then there's shame and embarrassment about maybe particular sexual issues. So if someone can't get an erection, or if they have rapid ejaculation or can't have an orgasm at all, they may carry some anxiety or shame or embarrassment about that. So that can certainly impair people's motivation. And also, a lot of people may not have faith and confidence that therapy can help, particularly couples therapy. Couples therapy, ironically, going to see a couples therapy is a risk factor for divorce. So a lot of people don't go, in part because they don't trust that it's going to be helpful, or they think that it's too expensive. But there is some evidence that actually going to a couples therapy is a risk factor for divorce. And the reason why that is because often people wait way too long before they go to see a couples therapist. There's so much water under the bridge, and resentment has built, and so they go to a couples therapist almost to kind of finalize the departure, the separation, rather than going early enough when they notice problems arising, and taking advantage of the help that's available.
Interesting. So, do you find that couples therapy is more of a tense environment because people might be nervous or shy or embarrassed, or do you feel like you would have to pry information out of people, or are they forthcoming of the information, or
Yeah, well, my time is expensive. That's what I tell people. So, if they're going to be here, how can I help them get to where they want to go as quickly as possible without requiring any unnecessary sessions? And then my style is rather unique. A lot of therapists are much more of that bobbing head. How do you feel about that? And that's just not my style. I tend to be much more straight to the point, no beating around the bush, an occasional karate chop to the throat, if that's what's necessary as an advocate for the relationship, right? So when couples hire me, they're really hiring me to be an advocate for the relationship, and I take that role very seriously, and so that I'm much more engaged and much more interactive with my couples than maybe a lot of other therapists.
Interesting. So, could you define or go into detail about how you engage with couples?
Yeah, if I notice that they are acting in ways that aren't helpful to the relationship, I give them that feedback. And I'll stop them immediately in session, and I'll give them an opportunity to correct how they're communicating to each other, so that they can try on the new behavior, like a coach to an elite athlete, right? So I'm giving my clients feedback so that they can improve on their communication pattern, or discontinue unhelpful relationship communication patterns. So it's really, the goal is to give them the feedback that they need in order to improve their relationship. But a lot of people kind of go relate to each other on autopilot, and or they, for example, stereotypically, a husband may say, "Well, I didn't grow up in a hugging family," right? And I'll ask them, "Well, is that something that you really admire about your family? That you didn't grow up in a hugging family?" And typically, the person says, "No, I don't admire it." Well, then I'll challenge them and be like, "Well, what does the evidence suggest? If you're in this relationship and you're not hugging, and you're not acknowledging that physical interaction is important, then the evidence would suggest that you in fact loved it so much growing up that you want to replicate that in your family of origin." So that, in kind of challenging in that way, I'm much more interactive.
And that leads into my next question. Thank you for that foreshadowing. In your practice, in your experience, when it comes to couples, do you find that couples are more likely to accept change, or are they more so stuck in their ways? Like, do you find it difficult to convince somebody that their old habits are not fruitful to the relationship? Or is it more you only have to say it once, and people catch on to it?
Sometimes it is only once, and the partner. It's often that there's the other partner who's like, "I've been telling you that for 10 years. Why is it that Dr. Tom says it and you now just get it, when I've been telling you that for 10 years?" That happens more often than might surprise people. And then there's other people that need that corrective feedback over and over. A lot of the problems that couples experience are called perpetual problems. Two-thirds of the problems that couples experience are perpetual problems, meaning that they are going to be the same problems that they fight about throughout the course of their entire relationship. And they're perpetual because they're tied to personality. And personalities are hard to change. So sure, if couples can solve that third of problems that are easily solvable, but come to a different way of relating to that other 2/3, well, now we have some flexibility that we can potentially move to move towards something that is much more meaningful and fulfilling for that couple.
Interesting. So, personalities being hard to unwind. Do you think that that is due to, I guess, trauma? If that makes sense?
It may be. I have that's such a hot topic.
Yeah.
A lot of my colleagues are very trauma. And I worry that it can actually impede people's ability to progress when things are framed as a response to trauma. So, for example, people might call and be like, is Dr. Murray a trauma therapist? And I really resist that label, trauma therapist, because in my mind, I'm like, why would I want to go to a trauma therapist? I want to go to a healing therapist, recovery therapist.
Positive words.
And so when I talk to people about what they've been through, and I have a whole chapter in the book around trauma, I remind people that the fact that, for example, John, the fact that you're sitting in front of me, right here, right now, is all the evidence I need that you have survived everything that's ever happened to you. And that's not by accident, right? You must have done everything right in order to get here, right now, in this moment, which is the only moment that exists. You must have done everything right. Now, a lot of people think, well, right means to feel good, right? If it's right, it must feel good. But of course, right doesn't do that. So while our past certainly informs how we got to where we are, I don't necessarily find that it always is helpful to link one's current life situation to something traumatic in the past, because the reality is you've survived that experience, and that wasn't by accident.
Yeah, so and you use some good words, survived. When somebody says I survived that, it kind of gives the impression that, what you're moving away from was something bad if you survived it.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you feel as though even if somebody survived it, they still, get that pull back to the trauma? Like, if you survive something, yippee, I survived, yay, I made a note of it, I survived it, now it's time to move on. Why survive something but still dibble and dabble in it and then complain about it in the greater relationship?
As is typical of answers within the profession, it really depends. So there are a variety of reasons. Certainly, some people find that their identity is very much wrapped up in their trauma narrative or in their trauma history. And so, who would I be without that history is the dilemma that some people may face.
So, Dr. Murray, my next question is about red flags. So, red flags it's a very popular term in the relationship setting. Glaring no-nos or non-negotiables when it comes to wanting to be with somebody. Can you share with us some common red flags that people might overlook in someone, for example? Throughout my experience personally, I have come to learn, and I've taught myself, that the little things in the beginning that I ignore end up costing me at the end.
Right.
And also, red flags when it comes to commitment. With the divorce rate being so high, I believe it's at least above 50% in America. There has to be, some red flags or some things about marriage, about commitment that people overlook or not take seriously when it comes to being married to somebody and raising a family, how can we be better at, noticing these red flags and making sure that the partner that we want to marry, we want to be with for long term, is the best partner for us?
Sure, sure. Well, marriage is a real transition from a me state to a we state. And a lot of people have difficulty in that transition, going from me to we. And so those people who struggle with that obviously are going to have the greater amount of problems. I like to think about all marriage is really a multicultural experience. No matter if you come from different countries or if you come from different houses that were next to each other, all marriage is a multicultural experience in which every marriage is a decision on which set of problems you're willing to live with. There is no problem-free marriage. Every relationship has its own risk factors associated with it. And those couples who are able to have longevity and viability are the ones that are able to actively manage those risk factors. Some of those red flags, they're called the dark triad attributes, right? And so if someone has these characteristics, narcissism, psychopathy, or Machiavellianism, those are the dark triad traits of people who are low in empathy, right? Who are manipulative, who seem to not be able to demonstrate compassion or concern. Those are the qualities that one wants to be on guard. How do they treat other people when no one's looking? If you're dating someone, I encourage people to ask about the other person's history. So what was it like dating these other people in your life, and listening. Not because you're interested in the details really don't matter. It's how the person tells the story. Do they tell the story and villainize that person, or are they able to speak positively of those past relationships and what they've learned about themselves from those relationships? In fact, in my opinion, that's what defines a good relationship, is if you are able to leave it having learned something new about yourself. Right? If you don't learn anything new about yourself, then it was a bad relationship. But if you can learn something new about yourself, it was a great relationship. So the other piece I would add is that a lot of people think, oh, you get married because you love the person. And that's ridiculous. You can love someone without marrying them. Or they think, oh, you get married to be happy. No, there are a lot of unhappily married people. You get married for one reason and one reason only, and that is because marriage helps making living life easier. So couples who are committed and who want a relationship with viability are the ones that are asking themselves and their partner, how can I help to make your life easier? How can I help to make your life easier? How can I help to make your life easier? And there's the flip of that is, how can I avoid making your life harder? How can I avoid making your life harder? So when you leave the clothes on the floor, that's making the person's life harder, right? And so you can, if a person is asking themselves that question, how can I make this person's life easier? How can I avoid making this person's life harder? That goes a long way at protecting the relationship, ensuring that it has viability.
Wow, you dropped a lot of gems. One thing I did like about what you just said, you could love somebody without marrying them. That's powerful. I never heard that before, but it has a lot of truth to it.
Yeah.
First question, first follow-up. Could you talk a little bit more about the 3 triad traits that you mentioned?
Yeah, so again, those are narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. And narcissism, we often think about as that person who thinks they're the best thing since sliced bread. You know, that they're very boastful. They have to have all of the attention. You know, their relationships are often very superficial. That's one form of narcissism. There's a lesser known or less acknowledged form of narcissism, which is the "I'm so uniquely terrible." You know, some people who really kind of, we talked a little bit earlier, kind of just taken on that victim role, that they're so, you know, uniquely terrible. So you actually have these two kind of different ways of expressing narcissism. That Machiavellianism is that very manipulative, you know, always strategic, thinking, you know, what are they going to get out of this arrangement? And then you have the psychopathy, which is that low empathy, could be very aggressive, violating boundaries. You know, those are the kinds of attributes that are known as the dark triad attributes, and those certainly are predictive of divorce, of violence, of high relationship distress.
Interesting. See, I've heard of the term narcissism, but the other two I have not. Of course, I've heard the term manipulative being thrown around.
Yeah.
And crossing boundaries, I've also heard about that being thrown around too. But the actual terms for each, I have not. I never knew about the dark triad. It's interesting.
Yeah. The other thing I would add, this is might surprising to people, is that the more attractive a man is, the less satisfied they tend to be in their relationships.
Interesting.
Yeah. And other
Wait,
research.
why is that?
Well, we don't know why. It's just correlation. You know, that we find that the more attractive someone is, the less satisfied they are in relationships. I can speculate, which is that the more attractive a man is, one could argue that they're spending a lot more time on their physique, which may be a expression of narcissism. So, for example, the research finds that when a man has a V-shaped torso, that's a risk factor for premature death, right? Because and you think, oh, okay, that makes sense, because to have that level of a physique, you have to be very intentional about it. You're spending time more likely doing higher risk activities than someone who's, say, sitting in their room playing video games, right? You know, you're not going to die in the video game chair. So when we look at these broader factors that contribute, you know, what to look for in a potential partner, you know, you want to be mindful, you know, about, again, kindness, consideration, the ability to collaborate, coordinate. In fact, that's what I talk about with my couples, is, you know, really relationshiping is about collaboration, coordination, consideration.
Interesting. And now that fact that you said about, you know, attractive men, does that also go for women as well, or is it
No.
so it's just men?
It's just men.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Next question that I have, next follow-up. You were talking about, you know, people and how they explain their past relationships. What have you noticed in the types of people who explain their past relationships from a victim perspective versus the type of people who explain their types of relationship from, I guess, an honest perspective? Like, what types of people are they?
Yeah, I think I understand. So if someone is when they talk about their relationships, are really focused on being wronged by the other person. You know, as colloquially known, past behavior predicts future behavior. So if they have this pattern of describing their past romantic relationships in that negative way, that's going to be a good estimate of how they are likely to be in the relationship with you, right? And so being able to, because that's what we're all trying to do, is this person a potential partner? Is there longevity here? Do I want to commit to this person? Do I want to engage in the risk? Well, how do I use the data that's available to me to start making that determination. And one of those things is how that person talks about important people in their life. Do they have a growth mindset? Are they learning about are they learning about themselves relative to their relationships? How are they using the information and their experiences to better themselves?
Now, you mentioned, how somebody speaks about their past is how they're going to show up, I guess, in their current relationship. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, it's again, basing it on what we know in psychology is past behaviors most predictive of future behavior. And so how do they describe themselves in these past relationships? How do they describe their partner? Do they take responsibility? Do they acknowledge their contribution to the problems? And have they made steps to be better in relationshiping? Those are the kinds of questions or the kind of information you're trying to gather when you're trying to decide whether someone's a suitable partner.
So, if somebody explains their past relationship from a victim perspective,
That's
are
right.
they looking, do you believe that in the present relationship that they're in, they're trying to, at least subconsciously, look to be the victim in every single situation? Am I following you in that sense?
What I would say it a little differently is that they are less inclined to take responsibility for their contributions to the problems.
Interesting. So it's almost as if you are, I guess, dating somebody new and they're already explaining their past in such a manner,
Yeah.
it's almost like as if like, okay, well, if they're already explaining their past in this manner, if I get into a relationship with this person, they're going to be reluctant to take responsibility in this relationship, or they're more likely to be reluctant to take
That's right.
responsibility.
That's right. Of course, we can't absolutely know, but again, people are trying to make a decision about is this an opportunity for a lifelong commitment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big decision. That's a real big decision. So how do you use the data available to you to make an informed decision? I heard someone say that they'll start using the TSA flight check membership. That if someone has TSA flight check approval, do you know what I'm referring to? They're probably golden because the federal government has already done the in-depth research about that person.
That's
right. It's kind of like the modern version of someone's FICO score. You're getting this piece of information. And I thought that was really just ingenious. But again, there are other risk factors. So, for example, we know that people who are from different cultures have a higher risk for divorce. People where there's a significant age gap between the couple is a risk factor for divorce. If in heterosexual relationships, if the wife's parents are divorced, then that's a risk factor. If the husband's parents are divorced, that is not a risk factor. But if both parents are divorced, that has a synergistic risk factor. So every relationship, all relationships have risk factors. A couple who go into a relationship with longevity are the ones who acknowledge those risk factors and are actively looking to manage those risks, because it's not possible to have a relationship without any risks.
I totally agree. And the first thing that you said couples of different cultures?
Yes.
So they both have to be of different cultures.
Well, presumably, if one's not of the same culture, they're different cultures. So, if someone's like from a Latino culture and someone's from like an Asian culture, they may have different ways of perceiving how relationships work, or different ways of expressing. Even if they're the same values, they may express those differently. And what couples tend to do is get couples who show up in my office, I should say, get very rigid around what's familiar to them and want to protect what's familiar to them, and then somehow communicate to their partner that their way isn't as appropriate.
Yes, and I can definitely see how friction can come about in that type of situation. You know, partner A representing their culture and their values and how they were raised, and partner B doing the exact same thing, both
Yes.
being reluctant to change. I can definitely see friction.
And I would add, even it can be, sometimes it can be just in difference in class. So if someone grew up in, like I grew up on welfare in central Pennsylvania, right? And that uh, um, culture, there's a culture associated with Appalachia, right? And that culture is very different if than people who grew up in a much more affluent situation. So they can be the same race, but culturally they're different, and there may be conflicts that emerge because of those differences.
Absolutely, I can definitely see that. Wow. Now I have one more question with regards like the victim mindset. You know, with your experience with your clients, with the people who come in, the couples that come in to speak with you, how long does it take, in your opinion? I mean, of course, there's not a for sure number or for sure amount of years or months, but how long does it take somebody to unwind that victim mindset? Like, have you had like a
Mm.
client or a couple, you know, when you saw or noticed that one partner had a victim mindset, and like how many sessions did it take? Sorry, how many sessions did it take for like that person to, I guess, become anew or have a different perspective?
Yeah.
Is it something that's short or it takes years?
It really differs on. There's so many factors, right, that contribute to it. You're using the term victim mindset, and there is some research that's suggesting that there is almost a victimhood personality type, uh, where a person is more, less likely to take responsibility, or projects onto other people the responsibility for their own unhappiness. And so when there's a maladaptive coping style, such as a victimhood temperament, that can take quite a while. There is a certain type of intervention called radically open dialectical behavior therapy, which is a lot of what I talk about in my book. And there's a skills class that's about 30 weeks, so there's 30 skills. And so we can think about it as people who are very invested in seeing how their personality is impeding their ability to have a meaningful and fulfilling life. Those ones that are motivated can experience change relatively quickly.
Wow. Have you ever had to recommend somebody to go to such therapy?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Fortunately, there are classes all around the country, around the world, that people can find these skills classes to learn how they, it's called social signaling, how they communicate to other people almost in subtle ways that may contribute to the emotional distance that they're actually experiencing in their relationships.
Wow, thank you. So my next question is about sex. You being a sex therapist. So in your opinion, how important is sex in a relationship?
I think it's vitally important. Now, I don't define sex though as just penetrative sex.
Yeah.
So there's a broad window, and if a couple has an agreement, or they're agreeing as to what sex means for them, I think it's just vitally important. Someone once said that if sex is a problem for a couple, it's going to contribute to 90% of their problems. But if sex is going well, it doesn't. Its impact isn't that great. So it's really when um, sex is an issue that it tends to impact many areas of the couple's relationship.
Have you seen successful relationships with a lack of sex?
Again, it really depends on how the couple defines
Oh, okay.
sex. There are some couples who have no penetrative sex whatsoever, and they have very satisfying and fulfilling relationships. And then there's others where one partner may want more sex than others, and in fact, that's a very common complaint why couples come in is there's a desire discrepancy. Someone wants more sex than the other, and working with the couple to get clear about what their definition of sex is, and hopefully shifting the conversation away from frequency to quality. Because if someone once said that the person who's wanting sex less may not have something wrong with them. They may actually have good judgment, right? That maybe their relationship issues are of a significant nature, that it's a deterrent to having a sexual relationship.
Can you talk a little bit more about some problems or common problems that people have or couples have with regards to sex in their relationship?
Yeah, so one of the most common reasons that people come to a sex therapist is low sexual desire. So someone has internalized, that they aren't, they've recognized that they're not as interested in sex as they would like to be. Uh, when people have low sexual desire, they often can blame themselves or their partner actually blame, what's wrong with you? You need to get your hormones checked. It's kind of this pathologizing language about someone's sexual desire. And I think that that's really born out of a misconception of what desire is actually like. If someone's, if most of their education has come from pornography, they may think that desire is what we call spontaneous desire. That is, the person just spontaneously thinks about sex and they're ready to go. That's not typical of a lot of people. A lot of people have different forms of desire. Spontaneous desire is what we culturally think of as the right one, which is the myth. And so if you don't have spontaneous desire where you're just ready to go at any time, you might think, oh, there's something wrong with me. Most women, for example, don't have spontaneous desire. They have either responsive desire or contextual desire. Responsive desire, which happens to be the one that I have, which is despite being a sex therapist, I actually don't think about sex all that much. But when my partner is sitting next to me and she puts her hand in my lap, and I'm like, oh, okay, I see what we're doing here, right? And then there's contextual desire, which is much more nuanced. It's a relationship between people's accelerators and inhibitors. What turns them on, what turns them off. And some people can have very sensitive inhibitors or brakes where, they hear a sound, they can't have sex, or there's a smell, they can't do it, or they're stressed, they're not interested. They know that there are dishes in the sink, that's going to be an inhibitor. Other people, they have stress can be an accelerator, right? They're stressed out. They want stress relief. They're ready. They're wanting to go, or maybe their partner just came back from the gym and you can smell the workout on them, and that's really exciting. So those people who have contextual desire are just way more nuanced. But if responsive or contextual desire folks believe that they should have spontaneous desire, right? When they shouldn't, then that can create a lot of problems. Other common issues are rapid ejaculation, or what used to be called premature ejaculation, erectile, what I call erectile disappointment, in that a lot of people with can get an erection when they're by themselves, but then not have an erection when they're with their partner. Well, the plumbing then works. It's just erectile disappointment. And then or difficulty having an orgasm at all. There's some of the primary reasons. Sexual pain is another reason that people will come in to see a sex therapist.
Wow. Okay. I have a lot of questions. Let's start off with the first one. With erectile dissatisfaction?
Disappointment.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
What age group is that common?
Great question. The younger a man is, the more likely they're going to want to see a sex therapist if they have erectile disappointment.
Oh, if they have.
Right. Because it's a lot of men believe as they get older, erectile disappointment, erectile dysfunction is just par for the course. And so when a younger man experiences it, they're much more motivated to seek out help. that being said, though, if someone is physiologically capable of getting erections and they're not getting an erection, it's a high probability that there's some psychological issue that's going on, usually anxiety, that's contributing to their erectile issues.
Is it also diet?
It certainly can be. If someone, for example, is obese or suffers from other cardiovascular issues, that's going to impact blood flow to the penis. But those are going to be persistent in most settings. And so if for example, if a man's waking up with erections, or if they're masturbating, then that's all the evidence I need that the plumbing works. If someone's having trouble getting an erection when they're by themselves or they're not waking up with an erection, then that might be some indication that it is physiological, and a sex therapist is going to be less helpful than, say, a urologist who can prescribe certain medications or certain instruments to help with erection viability.
And now, for a brief and short commercial break.
Hello there, dear readers. I'm absolutely thrilled to announce the release of the Making Nice with Nadia audiobook, narrated by yours truly. As the author, I've poured my heart and soul in telling your story, especially how your psychological temperament shows up in the bedroom and how it gets in the way of intimacy. With every sentence, every emotion, I'm right there with you, guiding you through getting more meaning and fulfillment in your sexual and intimate relationships. The wait is over. You can now download the audiobook on Audible or from my website, drtommurray.com, and immerse yourself in where you reclaim the playfulness of your sexuality. My voice is your compass as you navigate through every titillating moment, gaining powerful insights from psychology. Claim your aha moment. Click on the link and join me on this unforgettable journey toward making nice with Nadia. Making Nice with Nadia audiobook, available on Audible. Download now.
Now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Okay. Second question. Pre-ejaculation. Why do we do that? Why does that happen?
Are you referring to rapid ejaculation or premature
rapid.
ejaculation?
Are they different? Is there a difference between rapid and pre?
Well, it's often when right before sex, a man will have what's called pre-cum.
Yeah.
Right, and that's some suggest that that's a way to address the pH balance in a woman to get prepared for insemination, and so that's different. But you typically with rapid ejaculation, it's the full-blown ejaculation with the orgasm, and if that's occurring and usually in less than a minute after penetration, or sometimes it will happen even before penetration, then that's likely to be unsatisfying to both people, and so that becomes a problem. But the average person, just to correct, a lot of, again, porn, I'm not anti-porn by any stretch, but a lot of people who watch porn, what you're seeing are people who are having sex for 20, 30, 40 minutes without an ejaculation, and that just isn't actually happening in real life. A lot of those guys have taken like Trimex, I think it's called, which is an injection into the penis that gives you a 4-hour erection. So if you're on a porn set, you're going to have that erection. You may have already orgasmed, but you're able to keep on going and get more film during that time. So the average person, after penetration, is able to thrust for about 4 to 7 minutes without ejaculation. That's average. And so if we can move someone towards that range, then they're within kind of the normal range.
Okay. On the topic of porn and pornography, how important do you believe that masturbation is to a relationship? Do you suggest masturbating in a relationship? Do you not suggest masturbating in a relationship? Can it hurt your sex life? Can it help your sex life? What's your take on that?
I think part of what, certainly people may have religious prohibitions towards masturbation, but unfortunately, there's this myth that masturbation is the lesser alternative to having sex. And to me, it's just different, right? When you're masturbating, you don't have to worry about the needs of the other. So you can really kind of focus on your own pleasure without the interference of the other. And certainly, I think that for women, masturbation is important because women are more likely to have to learn their orgasm in a way that's very different than how men learn their orgasm. So spending time discovering how your body works is important so that you can better communicate what's pleasurable to your partner. So in general, I think masturbation is quite useful and necessary to have a healthy, fulfilling sex life. Now, there are some people who have out of control sexual behaviors and are using masturbation as a deterrent or a distraction from the intimacy that is a part of a typical sexual relationship. And so when masturbation is used in that kind of way, then it certainly can become problematic.
Interesting. Okay, so we're going to shift just a little bit. I want to talk about money.
Yeah.
So when a person decides to, I guess, marry and become in a long-term committed relationship with somebody, I'm sure, finances are a big deal. I'm sure you've heard like not misconceptions, but terms like, prenuptial agreement. You've heard about should we split the bills evenly? Should we split the bills proportionally? Shared bank accounts, no shared bank accounts. How important from your line of work, from your experience, is money in a relationship, in a marriage? Is that a deal breaker? Or do you see that people can move around it?
Yeah, that's also a great question. If we look at the research, the evidence suggests that it's not so much how much someone makes that's a predictor of relationship viability. It's whether that person has significant debt. So if someone has $50,000 of debt, that is much more of a stressor than if someone's making, let's say, the $30,000 a year. That it's really debt, and debt can be a indication of money management, right? So how well are they able to manage their finances? And then, of course, what kind of debt is it? Is it student loan debt? Is it consumer debt? Those are important distinctions to be thinking about. Money, it's easy to think about money and opportunity costs associated with money. And so when someone has decided to take out loans for school, and then they graduate, now they're having to pay back those loans, but that means that they're not able to do other things, such as put a down payment on a house because they're tied up on spending back on the student loans. So there can be that stressor there. You brought up prenuptial agreements. I'm a big fan of prenuptial agreements. I think everybody should have a prenuptial agreement. And one of the reasons that I support is based on my comment that I made earlier, right? Which is people get married because marriage is about making each other's life easier, and it's about avoiding making the other person's life harder. So a prenuptial agreement is, this is what happens if you don't keep your promise to avoid making my life harder, right? And so you have already that contract that is there if that person has not kept their agreement to avoid making your life harder.
Wow. What's your opinion on shared bank accounts?
I think that's just necessary. When you're living in a shared space, you have shared expenses. It's really important to have a way of managing those expenses. there's different philosophies on how to manage those. Some people do the 50-50. Other people do the proportional. So if let's say a couple, the combined income is 100,000, and someone's making 30,000 and someone's making 70,000, then if some people believe that a fair way is that this person's contributes 30% to the expenses, and this person contributes 70% to the expenses, and recognizing that it may not be equal, but it is fair.
Interesting. Now, we talked about a lot during this interview, and I just want your opinion. So when it comes to divorces, we have reluctant to change their ways, sex being an issue, money being an issue, debt.
Right.
If you were to rank those 1 to 3, from your experience, what's the most common when it leads to divorce? What's the most common between those three? Is it, most of my clients, most of the people who come to me, they leave because of sex, bad sex lives, a lot of debt, this person won't change their ways. How would you rank those?
Gosh,
Would you say that they're mostly equal?
Well, I think it's Esther Perel, who's a respected colleague and author. She says that most people don't leave marriages because they're terrible. They leave because they're looking for a better one. And so when we hold it, people when they get married, they are really excited about the possibility of the future, right? Most people. Unfortunately, when you get married, one of the risk factors of marriage is that desire or lust declines on average 8% per year, and liking your partner declines on average 4% per year. And this is within committed relationships. And so perhaps a reason for that is what's called moral hazard. So moral hazard is this phenomenon that people don't take as much care of something if they know that someone else is responsible for it. So for example, people who have health insurance use healthcare way more than people without health insurance, because the people with health insurance knows that the health insurance company is going to pay for the service that's being rendered. And so in a similar way, a lot of people, after they get married, they do this thing called the set it and forget it, which is they stop attending to the needs of the relationship over time, and then the relationship degrades. And that could be not talking about finances, not having important conversations about sex, or having unspoken expectations, right? And then when you have unspoken expectations, what comes about? Resentment, anger, bitterness. That's corrosive over time, and eventually someone begins to think, oh, I think my life would be better off out of this relationship.
Just curious, do you have any type of statistic, I guess, indicating the successfulness of, people leaving relationships to find a better relationship, and that relationship is not good? Is there a statistic on that?
Yes.
Because going back to what you're saying, the grass being greener on the other side, and people thinking that there's better out there, and they leave a capable partner thinking that somebody else is going to be great, and then that person's not great, and they look back at their old partner moved on. Is there any type of statistic or anything that you would like to say about, the likelihood or the successfulness of people jumping ship?
Well, divorce rates are higher for each successive marriage someone has. So second marriages are a much greater risk of divorce than first marriages, as third marriages are greater risk of divorce than second marriages. I think part of that might be that, for example, 80% of men remarry within 2 years after their first divorce. That is not a lot of time to really take account for one's own contributions to their relationship problems. So what I tell my couples in discernment counseling is that they can either work on their problems in this relationship or work on it in the next relationship, but they got to still work on the problems.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Murray, you're the author of your new book, Making Nice with Naughty, an intimacy guide for the rule-following, organized, perfectionist, practical, and color within the line types. First of all, congratulations on your new book. I know this is your first book. It's a huge accomplishment.
Thank you.
And also congratulations on the award that you received, the 2023 Global Ebook Award for Sexuality and Relationships.
That's right. Yeah.
So what brought you to want to write a book? You know, could you talk to me or talk to us a little bit about, you know, what the book is about? Just a brief overview.
For sure. So it was really inspired in 2020 at the height of the global pandemic. I was working with a couple on telehealth, and I just had this light bulb moment that I bet I could predict this couple's sex life by asking just one question. Are you a be careful parent? Be careful, be careful. Or are you a have fun parent? And they said, oh, definitely we're be careful parents. And I began to just play with that and realizing that a lot of the couples that I see who have children say that they are more likely to be these be careful parents and also have sexual issues in the bedroom. And so Making Nice with Naughty is a book that examines this particular temperament that's common among these kinds of people. It's called the over-controlled temperament, not to be confused with over-controlling, but the over-controlled temperament, or having too much self-control, where they're that rule-oriented, perfectionist kind of temperament that gets in the way of their ability to experience fulfilling sex life.
Yeah, and you know, I understand that there's a good reason as to why parents are over-controlled. You know, they want their kids to excel. They want their kids to, you know, make them proud.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I guess this is my next question, but you know, growing up, I was someone who definitely lived out the virtue of work hard, play hard.
Right.
And my mom, on the other hand, you know, being, I guess, an over-controlled parent, you know, protective, she wanted the best out of me.
Yeah.
You know, she really instilled in me, you know, no, John, it's not work hard, play hard. It's, you know, work hard, play soft. And when she told me that the very, very first time, I had to sit back and, you know, resonate with what she was saying, because I understand where she was coming from. You know, there's countless stories in my community of kids, you know, playing too much and getting in trouble with the law, playing too much and dropping out of school. And also that's very common in a college setting. And, you know, she really wanted me to be disciplined and, you know, value hard work and not get too distracted with that. And, you know, she kind of instilled in me, you know, as long as you play soft and you work hard, you're going to progress and move up in life. Now, in your first chapter of your book, Rules, 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 you talk about the downsides of, you know, an over-controlled nature, or having too many rules and having that, you know, inhibit you with your partner or your sex life with your partner. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so
in greater detail?
Yeah, the over-controlled temperament, I like to think about it as people who have a strong belief about how the world should be, must be, and has to be. They have very strong opinions. In fact, a lot of over-controlled people have this moral self-righteousness, right? They have just a strong, it should be this way. I like to give the example of, you know, you're over-controlled when you go behind your partner to rearrange the dishwasher because they just didn't do it right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that would be an indication of there's just one right reason or right way to do it and you're just not doing it. And so if you're on the receiving end of that, if you're the partner of someone who's over-controlled, you can imagine how off-putting that would be if everything that you're doing, you're concerned that it might be critiqued, right? And so a lot of these over-controlled people, what they fear is uncertainty, right? That's the greatest fear of over-controlled people, is uncertainty. And it's because uncertainty makes them feel vulnerable. Well, when it comes to sex and intimacy, vulnerability is an essential ingredient. And so that's where the rub happens. when it comes to making nice with naughty. And I use that term, making nice with naughty, because just as it sounds like perhaps your mother was implying, a lot of people are made to believe that being naughty is bad, right? Being the risk taker, being spontaneous, being adventurous, that's naughty, and so they've acquired this idea that I have to be predictable, planful, and deliberate and diligent and all of those things. And so that aspect of naughtiness has taken on have a bad relationship with naughtiness. So that making nice with naughtiness is the idea of really making friends with it, if you're wanting to have a more meaningful and fulfilling sex life.
So almost like seeing naughty from a different perspective.
That's right.
That's what you mean by making nice.
That's right.
Interesting. Now, being over-controlled, or in the book you say OC, is that all the way bad? Like, is there any benefits of some sort of control, or just dismiss it 100% and just be vulnerable and be spontaneous all the time? Or should there be some control? Like, what is the pie chart for, say, like, 70% spontaneous, 30% controlled, 100% spontaneous?
I think it's really about context. The over-controlled temperament is viewed as a virtue in the greater society.
Okay.
Right? As your mother was also highlighting, it's like if someone can be planful and diligent and reliable, dependable, if they are looking to mitigate risk, if they're avoiding unnecessary threats, being threat sensitive, rejection sensitive, that can be very useful in a lot of areas of life. I mean, think about it. If you're going to have a bridge built, you want to have it built by an over-controlled person. Right. You don't want it built by an under-controlled person. And so in the world out there, over-controlled is a strength. It's a virtue. But for some people, if the over-controlled temperament is going to be a problem, where does it show up as a problem? In people's sexual and intimate relationships, where they're low sexual desire, where they may experience erectile problems, in a difficulty getting and having an orgasm. For example, an orgasm, what is an orgasm but the total loss of control? And so some people have difficulty achieving orgasm because they're not willing to let go in the way that your body may need in order to have that experience.
Thank you for your answer or your response. I guess my follow-up to that, with over-controlled people, businessmen, doctors, lawyers, people who really take their lives seriously. I'm not saying that other disciplines don't, but what are some recommendations or some baby steps that an over-controlled person can use to instill in their life to try to unwind from a sexual standpoint in the bedroom or with their partner? Kind of like that saying, I'm a lady in the streets but a freak in the sheets, but from a over-controlled standpoint. Like, I'm over-controlled in the streets, but I am spontaneous with my partner. Like, right. What are some steps that people can take to unwind that behavior and say, you know what, 5 o'clock when you come back into this house, leave that at the door, let's have some fun?
The first step will buy my book and read it. Right?
Yes, buy his book. Buy his book.
You have to understand how the over-controlled temperament shows up, right? And how, again, it's a strength in many areas of one's life, but it can also become a weakness. For example, one of the favorite F words of an over-controlled person is frustrated. I'm feeling frustrated. This is frustrating. Well, if someone is feeling frustrated, it's because they believe that some rule is being broken, right? So if I'm frustrated that my partner is late, I have a rule that my partner should be on time, right? And so if I'm willing to take a moment and reframe that experience of frustration as a signal that a perceived rule is being violated, now I'm empowered to actually question the rule, right? Some people, for example, they might believe, oh, sex can only happen in the bedroom. They may have a rule, sex can only happen in the bedroom, right? Well, that may be fine for a while, but then what happens is sex becomes very predictable, right? Or it becomes almost like a same show every time. I call it nipple pussy sex, right? So the sex looks exactly the same no matter what, when it happens. Everybody knows what's going to happen. Well, if that's what you're expecting, it doesn't make it all that exciting to pursue. Right? And so that can happen a lot with people who are over controlled, as they get into these ruts. They eat oatmeal every single day. That's what they like. They're going to eat it every day, right? And desire, in order to have desire, you need mystery. You need the not knowing. You need a little anxiety in the mix. And for over-controlled people, they've spent their whole life being told, if anything is awkward, if it feels awkward, run from it. But in fact, having a little bit of awkwardness is the evidence that you're approaching something new. And that newness, that novelty, is an important part of maintaining that fire of desire.
Interesting. Now, piggybacking off of a comment that you said, being over controlled, the sex needs to happen in the bedroom, those types of people. I don't know if you've heard about this, but what is your take on planned sex? Would you describe that as being over controlled? I mean, there's many different instances for planned sex. You could have two people who are very, very busy, and woman is doing her thing, man's doing the thing. I mean, people are doing their own thing, and they don't have enough time throughout the day to sit down and perform the act of sex unless they plan it. Would you say that that's more of an over-controlled attribute to have, or is that a weird mix of, I guess, over-controlled or controlled and spontaneity?
It's really, again, it depends. For a lot of couples, planning it may be an essential or just maybe a reality of their life, and so they know that if they want it to happen, they're going to have to put it on the books. Now, it's really the how the couple responds to the planning. For example, affairs. What are affairs? Planned sex, scheduled sex, and it's very hot and very exciting, right?
That is true.
So people can have planned sex that's very hot and very exciting, but if it's like, oh, this is the thing on my to-do list that I have to do, well, that's not very exciting, and that makes sex become more like work, and who wants to do that, right? So it's really the relationship people have with the planned sex more than just the actual act of planning it.
Wow. So sitting here just talking to you, relationship with sex, perspective when it comes to sex, that tricks the mind, and that really determines how you approach it.
That's right. Earlier I talked about Esther Perel, and another thing that she says is foreplay begins immediately after sex ends. So in other words, how you're relating to your partner between sexual episodes, so that the tension, the sexual tension, begins to build, so that when sex is happening, you're able to fully enjoy it. If you think if foreplay is just those few minutes in order to get an erection or to get lubricated, and then there's not the sexual seductive play that happens between sexual episodes, then it's just, again, it can lose its potency over time.
Okay. You just brought up another word, foreplay. What's your take on foreplay? Do you feel as though foreplay should happen 30 minutes before sex, an hour before sex, the whole day?
Well, like I said, my recommendation is that people have a broader understanding of what foreplay is. It's foreplay is, to me, how are you showing up in a way that makes it easy for your partner to want to stay? right? So are you showing up in a way that makes it easy for your partner to want to stay? Are you, or are you, for example, letting yourself go? That you're not spending enough time with your attractiveness, whatever that means for the person. If the person themselves don't feel attractive, then it's no mystery that their partner may also not find them attractive. So how do we invest in ourselves as sexual beings? And then how do we express that over the course of time? So I like to think of foreplay much more broadly than kind of the traditional definition of foreplay, which is kind of what do we need to do to get the sexual tension going.
Interesting. Thank you for your response.
Yeah.
Also talking about chapter 1, rules, rules, rules. And within the chapter, you talk about the 4 traits of an over-controlled person. Can you go into a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah, so kind of elaborating on some of the things that we talked about. One is perfectionism, right? This hyper-perfectionism. And that can become, that can come to play relative to one's sex life in that there are 4 types of sexual perfectionism. The I have to be sexually perfect. My partner has to be sexually perfect. I think my partner thinks I have to be sexually perfect, and society expects me to be sexually perfect. So that one area of that over-controlled temperament is that kind of that rule-based perfectionism. Another one would be that a lot of over-controlled people tend to hide their emotions. So they may be anxious and depressed on the inside, but to the world out there, the world would never know it. In fact, if you ask an over-controlled person how they're feeling, their other favorite F word is fine, right? I'm fine. And so they're not, they don't express much emotion. Some people call it resting bitch face. They don't carry much emotion. And that can communicate threat to our partners, right? The neutral face can communicate threat to our partners. So sexually, as you can imagine, if that's the energy you're putting off, then it doesn't make for a very enticing sexual experience. The other thing is that over-controlled people tend to have a very narrow range of excitability, right? So they don't get very excited, but their emotional response is relatively muted, and that certainly can contribute to issues. And then they have impairment in their social signaling, as I talked about earlier. A lot of over-controlled people are aloof, right? And so they avoid vulnerability. They avoid anything that's going to be anxiety provoking. And yet, what do we know about evolution and growth? Evolution and growth only happens in the space of discomfort.
Yes. Yes. 100%. Yes. Now, those are the 4 most common. Is there like a number 1 out of the 4?
Well, different people are certainly going to have, how should I say, certain aspects of the over-controlled nature would be more pronounced for some people than for other people. Like, for example, over-controlled people tend to avoid feedback, right? Particularly critical feedback. And there are ways of showing up. One is the overly disagreeable subtype. So the over-controlled is the major label, but there are 2 types of over-controlled people. There's the overly disagreeable, which is the kind that I have, right? Which is, I'm much more likely to be a no first person, assess the landscape, and then say yes.
So you're safe.
Yeah, much more kind of that safe. Then there's the overly agreeable, right? So the overly disagreeable people have a need to be right. The overly agreeable are the ones who have a need to be liked. And so those kinds of different those kinds of forms of over-controlled are just going to determine how someone shows up.
Interesting. Do you see that it's common that 2 over-controlled people of the opposite form are in relationships?
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's certainly common. Yes, that's very common. I thought what you were going to say are you're more likely to have 2 over-controlled people in a relationship versus an under-controlled, because that's the polar opposite of the...
Please speak about that.
Yeah. So the under-controlled are people who are much more mood-oriented. They tend to be more spontaneous. They tend to be impulsive or reactionary. They wear their emotions on their sleeve. They tend to have big emotions versus the over-controlled, which would be somewhat of the opposite. And you're going to see examples of that. But the research, there's a growing body of research that people really do try to gravitate to people who are much more like them.
Interesting. And you said the more spontaneous are under-controlled?
Yes.
Now, do you follow zodiac signs?
No.
No. Okay. Well, I don't. I don't. But I mean, it's just, in my feed and stuff like that, so I can't help it.
Sure.
So sometimes they say, these zodiac signs have the best sex life. These zodiac signs are like the most compatible. Do you feel as though an under-controlled person and an over-controlled person, like their sex life would be good?
Sometimes in that kind of situation, it's very likely that the over-controlled person would be much more shut down. They would feel sexually shut down because the under-controlled person may want to do much more, dare I say, riskier things. So let's say the under-controlled person wants to go have sex in the woods, right? The over-controlled person, being risk-sensitive, threat-sensitive, rejection-sensitive, may be afraid of some hiker coming through the path and discovering what they're doing, and that gets them to it triggers their hypervigilance and makes it difficult for them to have a good time.
Interesting.
And keep in mind with these temperaments, the under-controlled and over-controlled, one's not better than the other. They're just like temperaments. They're just stable ways of showing up in the world. Two of the most famous temperaments are introversion, extroversion, for example. So we would never say one is good and one is bad. They're just different ways of showing up in the world. As an expert in the over-controlled temperament, what we find is that people can become more and more intense in their over-controlled nature, and the more rigid they are, the more likely that they're going to have more difficult problems. So for example, people on the very far end of the over-controlled continuum are more likely to suffer from things like anorexia, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, not to be confused with obsessive compulsive disorder, refractory or resistant treatment resistant anxiety and depression, anxiety disorders. Those are more likely to happen at the very far end of the over-controlled temperament.
Okay. Well, my next question, I believe we already kind of spoke about this, but I mean, I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case you want to fill in the blanks. My next question refers to chapter 2, Making Nice with Naughty. And you talk about in the chapter how, having an over-controlled personality can impede sexuality. And you talk in great detail of like the traits as well. Did you already talk about those traits, or are there more traits?
No, I talked about those 4 ones and applied them to the sexual relationship. So for example, if someone has rigid rules around what sex has to look like. So for example, if someone has said, I need to have an erection every time we have sex, then that tells me that they have a very rigid or very limited view of what sex means. And when that is that it's performative, right? That certain things have to happen in order to have a good time. And if they don't happen, it then defines whether they are going to have a good time. And that kind of rigidity doesn't allow for the flexibility of spontaneity.
Interesting. Okay, well, my last and final question, what are your top reasons as to why people should attend therapy? My first question was, why do you believe that people do not attend therapy? So I'm ending on why people should attend sex therapy.
Well, the evidence is that by and large, people benefit from attending therapy, that it is a very effective form of addressing behavioral change. And so, there's a lot of research that supports its efficacy. So certainly, just on a pure empirical level, it's effective. But most of what determines whether therapy is going to be effective is the quality of the therapeutic relationship. So I would first say that if someone is looking to explore therapy of all kinds, that they really think about that connection with that therapist. Is that therapist going to relate to them in a way that feels comfortable, feels familiar, that may challenge them in ways that are important? So when I go to therapy, I'm going because I want a fresh perspective, a different way of looking at an old problem, perhaps getting some insight on different strategies to deal with something. And so I think that that's really what the benefit of going to therapy is you have someone who's particularly trained in either psychology or human relations, and that they're able to provide a different perspective. Because when you're in the weeds of your own problems, it's hard to be able to see possibility. And I think a good therapist is one that is able to help you to see a different way of looking at an old problem.
Absolutely. Like for me, for example, when I write an essay, it's always good to have fresh set of eyes look at your essay, because I wrote it from my perspective.
Yeah.
Somebody else can be like, oh, you missed a period, you missed a comma, this is a run-on sentence. And that's how I kind of see therapy.
Yeah.
Having a fresh set of eyes or a fresh set of ears, listen and see the problem that you're going through, and giving their opinion on how to best handle it.
That's right. That's right.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed today's interview. And everybody, please, Making Nice with Naughty, Dr. Tom Murray, excellent book. I definitely suggest that you all should read it and buy it. It's an award-winning book, 2023. And I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Is Marriage Right for You? Hopefully there were a few insights, a few takeaways that you can apply to your own friendships, relationships, and marriages. And ladies and gentlemen, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.